What happens next if a CEO is kicked out by security from the very bank he founded? The voice of Melissa Grant echoed through the quiet space like a slap to the pride, not just of one man, but of an entire generation pushed aside despite standing right at the center. The main hall of the Oak Ridge Bank branch, a bright space with gleaming tiles and walls adorned with slogans about kindness and respect, suddenly turned cold. Everything froze. Staff stiffened. Customers looked up. Only one person remained still. Julian Carter, the man just called out by name, calmly standing at teller number 4, with a withdrawal slip for $75,000, along with his ID card and passbook that he had slid through the glass nearly 5 minutes ago. He wore no fancy suit, no expensive watch, no secretary by his side. He was simply dressed in a dark blue jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, looking as ordinary as any other customer. Perhaps that was the fault that made him suspicious. As 2 security guards approached, their hands lightly resting on their belts, ready to intervene, Julian turned to them with a voice neither sharp nor defensive, just simple and calm. "I am only requesting to withdraw money from my own account. I have provided all the necessary documents. I have not raised my voice nor threatened anyone." But Melissa didn't listen, or rather, she refused to listen. Her eyes remained fixed on the man's skin color, as if no piece of paper mattered more than the personal impression she clung to. "We do not give cash to fraudsters, especially people like you." Her words poured out like poison in broad daylight, inside a bank whose walls still bore the sign, "Customers are the heart of our business." But which heart beats to the rhythm of prejudice? Julian took a quiet breath, neither responding nor turning away. He simply placed his hand lightly on the counter, pressing gently as if to steady himself amid the brewing storm. In the hall, some customers began whispering. A few discreetly pulled out their phones. Not everyone understood what was happening, but the tension spread like electricity through the air. Perhaps just a glance from Julian could have sparked an explosion. But he did not. He was not here to preach or create drama. He was here to make a transaction, the same transaction every other customer makes daily. The only difference was they were not accused before being served. And in that moment, as Melissa signaled the guards, everyone believed they were about to witness a man forcibly removed from the bank, humiliated in public, for the crime of not looking like someone with $75,000. But what they didn't know was that the man didn't just have $75,000. He held the power to decide the fate of the entire bank. And in just a minute, that would be proven. There are paths to success paved by background and connections, but Julian Carter never walked those roads. 20 years ago, he was a young man with a crooked tie and a trainee badge around his neck, standing behind teller number 3 at a small branch in the city's west suburbs. No one remembered his name, and no one thought that quiet black employee would one day sit at the highest floor of the central headquarters. But Julian didn't need anyone to believe in him from the start. He believed in himself. For 2 decades, Julian didn't jump straight to the top. He climbed rung by rung, through every quarterly report, through every turnaround campaign during crises. When the Miami branch faced bankruptcy due to bad debts, he was silently sent down and revived it within 6 months. When the online transaction system failed and angered thousands of customers, he stayed up 3 nights straight with the tech team patching the holes. No one assigned him these tasks for reputation, because they knew if Julian took it on, he would see it through. And so he was promoted to branch manager, then regional director, then executive vice president, until reaching a position with no one above him but the board, CEO. Along that journey, he earned an MBA from Wharton, but the most important qualification he carried every day was listening and perseverance. Yet no matter how high he climbed, Julian sensed something wrong lurking behind closed doors. Vague whispers he once overheard became clearer when he donned a suit. Someone asked after a meeting, "Are you the new head of security?" A director from another branch shook his hand and bluntly asked, "Do you have family on the board?" Their smiles could be friendly, but their eyes never truly trusted him. And in some strategy meetings where Julian presented detailed plans for the next quarter, some didn't look at the documents but only at his skin color. Julian understood, achievements don't erase prejudice, only push it temporarily into the shadows. But recently those shadows grew more distinct. Internal reports showed customer satisfaction levels were high. However, when Julian requested data broken down by race and age, he saw disparities. People of color often waited longer, faced additional paperwork demands, and had higher transaction denial rates. Numbers don't lie, but the system is skilled at hiding the truth. Julian couldn't stay silent. He once believed system change was enough. But now, he realized, to cure a disease, you must touch the pain. So he decided to leave the top floor, leaving behind business cards, power, and even his perfectly tailored suit, to wear a simple hoodie, pull on a nameless cap, and enter the central branch as a stranger. No entourage following, no cameras or scripted TV show. Just a man wanting to see if the system he built was still worth defending. And he didn't know that this quiet return would become the greatest ethical test the bank had ever faced. On a Tuesday morning, just after 9 o'clock, Julian Carter gently pushed open the revolving door of the Oak Ridge branch like any ordinary man entering for a routine transaction. No one glanced back, and no one needed to. He wore a dark blue hoodie with no logo, light gray khakis, and slightly worn sneakers. Beneath the brim of his cap, his face was stubbled, his hair neatly trimmed but not meticulously styled. He carried no briefcase, wore no watch, and bore none of the aura of an executive. That was exactly what he wanted. He sat down in the waiting area beneath a large screen broadcasting the morning financial news. One hand held his phone, pretending to scroll, the other resting lightly on his knee, ears open to listen. Within the first 15 minutes, what he witnessed tightened his throat. A well-dressed white man walked in and was immediately greeted by a smiling employee who bowed slightly and ushered him directly to a priority area without taking a number. Immediately after, an elderly Asian couple arrived. They were not welcomed, but instead pointed toward the number ticket machine with no greeting. A white woman in sportswear approached the quick service counter and was cheerfully attended to, finishing her transaction in 2 minutes. But a Latin man in work clothes approaching the same counter just minutes later was asked 3 times for identification, with the employee's eyes scanning him head to toe as if looking for faults. His transaction dragged on over 10 minutes due to additional verification. Julian observed 6 more customers. The pattern repeated smoothly like a programmed machine. White, welcoming, other races, wary. No discriminatory words were spoken. But it was the silence, the lack of eye contact, the delays, the invisible caution that spoke loudest. You are not the preferred customer. Julian glanced at his watch. 37 minutes had passed. He had arrived earlier than most, but was still waiting. Then, after 3 customers behind him were served, a voice called out, "Counter 4 is ready." He stepped forward, a polite smile on his lips. Tina, a young employee with a tense face and fingers typing rapidly, looked up at him, her eyes noticeably dimmer than those of the previous customer. "I want to withdraw money," Julian said softly, without hurry. $75,000. Here are my documents and card." Tina's eyes widened, lips pressed tight. She did not react as if handling a large transaction, but as if suddenly thrust into an unexpected situation. Her hand trembled slightly as she took the papers. No one knew that after her nod, a domino effect of reactions beyond her control would begin. But Julian did. He saw the caution in her eyes. He felt the awkwardness spreading from her fingertips to her hesitant words. He did not lose his temper, did not question. He simply stood there, watching how the system reacted to a simple, polite man with complete documents, but with one difference they could not overlook: his skin color. And he knew that right after Tina's gaze would come whispers, then supervisors, then security. But what they didn't know was they had just started to open a door to an ethical test, the outcome of which would change the entire bank. Tina remained silent. She looked at the screen, her hand gliding over the keyboard but not typing. Julian stood there, his gaze unwavering, neither pleading nor demanding, just patiently waiting. Behind the thick glass, the tension was no longer mere atmosphere. It became a kind of pressure, weighing down every movement and every breath. Tina glanced toward the adjacent counter, where Greg Wallace, the middle manager, was watching from the corner of his eye. Without any clear signal, Greg stepped forward. Tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a fitted shirt and a slightly crooked red tie, he stood behind Tina, his voice low but deliberately louder than necessary. "Is there a problem here?" Julian lifted his head to face Greg. "There is no problem. I am making a withdrawal, just like any other customer." Greg nodded slowly, neither pulling out his wallet nor asking for documents, but looking Julian over like an officer inspecting a suspect. "That is a large sum," he said. "We need to verify further." Tina, still silent, began entering information into the system, not to process the transaction but to pull up the account history, searching for anything suspicious. Greg glanced at the papers, then looked up with a hint of doubt. We have encountered some suspicious activities recently, especially with accounts of this type. He emphasized the word type, as if referring to a race rather than a customer category. Julian remained calm. My account is premier, with a daily withdrawal limit of $150,000. $75,000 is not an issue. Greg said nothing. Tina called to Greg. Do you want me to print the last 3 months of transaction history? Greg nodded. At that moment, another employee, Jason, approached. He bent down and whispered something to Greg, but not quietly enough for Julian not to hear. Looks like money laundering. The words were as soft as a breath, but heavier than any accusation ever laid on an innocent person. Jason looked up, flashing a fake smile as if the accusation was just a side note. We just need to be sure this money really belongs to you. You understand, right? For your own good. Julian looked at them. All those people behind the counter paid by money he approved, their salaries signed off by him. They didn't know who stood before them. They only saw a black man in a hoodie withdrawing a large sum, and immediately their gaze shifted from service to suspicion. Julian did not shrug or argue. He only repeated in a calm, clear voice, I have provided all the necessary documents, my bank card, and I am a longtime customer. I request that you process this transaction according to procedure. Greg remained motionless. Jason turned away, trying to suppress a smile. No one asked Julian why he needed to withdraw money, but all assumed the reason was illegitimate. They did not check similar transactions from earlier that day. They did not verify the white customer who had withdrawn over $100,000 in 2 transactions within an hour. They only saw an exceptional case and assumed that man could not be legitimate. Within minutes, the initial suspicion turned into a closed trial, with no judge, no record, no need for law, all based solely on skin color and an unbranded hoodie. Julian knew he was not just withdrawing money. He was touching the polite mask this entire system wore to avoid confronting the very bias they had nurtured in silence. He had yet to speak harsh words, because he was waiting, not because he couldn't act, but because he knew letting the truth reveal itself was the sharpest strike. Melissa Grant's voice cut through the quiet like a velvet bullet, her sweet tone wrapped in thick suspicion. Without introducing herself or asking who anyone was, she simply stepped forward, positioning herself between Julian and the staff as if withdrawing cash were a privileged subject to her personal approval. Julian met her gaze steadily, unfazed as if he had anticipated this exact moment. I don't owe anyone an explanation for withdrawing my own money, he said softly but clearly. Melissa forced a smile, the kind reserved for those she deemed not fitting the bank's brand. But $75,000 is certainly a noteworthy amount, she said evenly, her eyes drifting down to Julian's hoodie, then pausing on his dark hand resting on the counter. No one in the lobby knew that Melissa had once declared in a staff meeting, "We need to build a brand that caters to upscale clients, those with taste and standards." And now, her so-called standards were being challenged by a man with no Rolex, no Mont Blanc briefcase, but demanding a withdrawal sum most customers here never touched. We only process such transactions for customers with clear histories, Melissa said, feigning a glance at Julian's ID but holding it loosely between 2 fingers, as if afraid to touch something unclean. And honestly, she lowered her voice but made sure everyone could hear, accounts like this are not suited for people like you. The air froze. Her words crossed from suspicion into accusation, a verdict needing no proof but skin color. Tina, the teller, now looked down, her hands trembling slightly as she rearranged the papers. She no longer wanted to continue but dared not speak up. Greg stood with arms crossed, eyes fixed on Julian, while Jason struggled to suppress a crooked smile revealing his smugness. You think you can beat the system? Their eyes seemed to ask. Julian did not react as they expected. He was neither angry nor loud, nor did he storm off defeated. He simply stood there, tilting his head slightly as if studying a chessboard. Then Jason, unable to hold back, stepped closer, feigning friendliness but speaking deliberately louder than necessary. Did you just inherit money, or win the lottery or something? Several customers turned around to look. Some pulled out phones. Melissa noticed too, and that unsettled her. She wasn't worried about being unprofessional. She was worried this situation was becoming a public relations nightmare. You're causing a disturbance, she snapped. We have no obligation to serve uncooperative individuals. Security, please escort this person off the premises. Two guards immediately stepped forward, hesitant but advancing. Julian did not back down. He did not raise his hands or move. He spoke very quietly and calmly to them. "I have presented all necessary documents. I have not raised my voice, and I have not violated any regulations." But his words were not for them. They were for the entire system of cameras recording, for the people filming, for the watching eyes that could no longer look away. Unable to bear the defiance, Melissa shouted louder, "Escort this person out immediately. We do not serve fraudsters." Julian slowly bent down, pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, his movements deliberate and clear as if rehearsed. Some in the room held their breath, fearing he might do something rash, but he simply raised the phone, dialed a familiar number, and put the call to his ear. His voice rang out clearly in the thick atmosphere. "Hello, this is Julian Carter. I am being forced to leave the Oak Ridge branch while merely trying to withdraw money from my own account. Security is touching me." His words hung in the air, leaving only the ticking clock on the wall. Melissa froze. Jason cleared his throat. Greg stepped back half a pace. They had no idea what they had just unleashed, but Julian knew the call was not going to a support center, but to the true power center of the bank. And what they once treated as a petty expulsion was about to become a full-scale purge. The phone pressed against Julian's ear was an unexpected weapon. Without raising his voice or threatening anyone, he simply stated the facts. "I am being forced to leave my own branch while trying to withdraw money from my personal account." While security still had their hands on his sleeves, the atmosphere in the transaction hall seemed to freeze. Everyone thought they were dealing with a difficult customer. None of them, Melissa, Greg, Jason, or even Tina, realized they were inadvertently pulling the trigger on their own system. On the other end of the line came a calm voice. "I'm on my way. Don't let anyone leave the branch." The name Julian mentioned was Isaac Monroe, Chief Operating Officer of the entire Larchmont banking system. He was not someone easy to reach. Most employees didn't even know his face. But with one short call, Julian had put the entire executive operation on high alert. Melissa heard the name, and for a brief moment her eyes flickered unsteadily. Isaac was not someone a regular branch manager could call, unless they were at a higher level or a peer. Who is he to have Isaac's number? That question exploded in her mind. Jason whispered something to Greg. Both began exchanging uneasy glances. Tina, for the first time since everything started, looked up and studied Julian carefully. This time her gaze wasn't judgmental but recognizing, perhaps recalling a company meeting where a leader in a blue suit with short hair and contemplative eyes was shown, eyes just like the man before her now. At headquarters, Isaac Monroe had just risen from his chair when the call ended. He needed no further explanation. He recognized that voice, no mistake. He nodded to his assistant. "Retrieve all complaint files from the Oak Ridge branch for the past 12 months. Alert the legal department to prepare to document everything that's happening." From the adjacent conference room, a board member saw Isaac hurrying by and asked, "What's going on?" Isaac replied, "Something the whole system needs to witness." Back in the bank lobby, Julian lowered the phone, his eyes sweeping across the room as a silent declaration. The security guards hesitated, then removed their hands from his sleeves and stepped back, as if automatic gates were opening before true authority. Jason no longer smiled. Greg suddenly looked down at his feet, as if the floor had become too hot. Melissa, the same woman who shouted at Julian minutes before, stood motionless, sweat beginning to bead at her temples. Suddenly the large rear doors swung open. The sound of expensive heels echoed on the marble floor. A tall man in a sharp suit with eyes like razor blades strode in. Isaac Monroe had arrived. He said nothing, asked nothing. He simply looked at Julian and said 3 words. "Release him now." The 2 guards immediately raised their hands and stepped aside like gates opening for power itself. The hall fell utterly silent. Isaac took a step forward and faced Melissa, his gaze icy. "Do you realize what you've done?" Melissa forced a smile. "I was just following protocol." Isaac shook his head and turned to Julian. "I apologize," he said. For the first time in over a decade, the head of operations bowed before an employee. But in this case, that employee was the CEO. Julian said nothing. He stood firm, no further words needed. Every excuse, every reason, every biased assumption had turned into proof. In less than 10 minutes, the power had shifted. Those who had been controlling the game no longer held the pieces. The board now belonged to Julian, and a new game was about to begin. Isaac Monroe's arrival struck the transaction hall like a lightning bolt, shattering the tense atmosphere. No one had ever seen a high-ranking executive from headquarters enter a branch unannounced, much less issue such a decisive command in broad daylight in front of all customers and staff. Every step Isaac took toward Julian pushed Melissa and her associates closer to the brink. "Do you know who he is?" Isaac asked, his voice low but sharp enough to silence the entire room as if locked tight. Melissa swallowed hard. Gone was the commanding manager who barked orders. I'm not sure. He didn't introduce himself." Isaac crossed his arms and motioned. "Let me help you. The person you ordered security to remove, the one you implicitly insulted, questioned, and treated like a fraud. That is Julian Carter, the CEO of this entire banking system." No laughter. No words. Only a stunned silence spreading like a shockwave from an invisible explosion. Jason stepped fully back, covering his mouth as if holding back nausea. Greg wobbled, his face pale. Tina nearly burst into tears. Each reacted differently, but all shared one thing. Their masks had fallen. There was no room left for doubt, no way to deny the truth exposed before the security cameras, in front of customers, and, most importantly, before their own conscience. Isaac scanned the room, then took a step back, yielding space to Julian. All eyes turned to the man once thought merely a stranger. But now, everyone sensed something different about him, a calmness not of the powerless, but of someone accustomed to facing authority and wielding it without show. Julian was neither angry nor bitter. He simply looked at each person, Melissa, then Greg, then Jason. Each gaze was a mirror reflecting their deeds, needing no words. Melissa, Greg, Jason. He named them slowly, decisively. "You are fired, effective immediately." No one objected. No one dared speak. Each word was a blade cutting all excuses. "Not because you erred in procedure," Julian continued, his voice firm as stone, "but because you proved you are unfit for the ethical values of this bank. You have harmed not just a customer, but the trust we have built for so many years." Isaac nodded, eyes never leaving Melissa. She now slumped, eyes red but too proud to cry. Jason turned his face away. Greg stepped back one pace at a time, not waiting for anyone to push him. Some customers began to applaud, first hesitantly, then bursting into a unified ovation like the climax of a symphony. Julian did not bow or leave. He stood in the bank's hall as a reminder that justice need not arrive clad in suits or harsh words. Sometimes it comes from a man in a hoodie, standing amid judging eyes, using his calm to overturn an entire system. And as he walked out of the hall, without cameras or press, everyone knew. A new chapter had opened for this bank, built on honor, truth, and the voice of one who dared to let silence speak. When Julian Carter left the Oak Ridge branch, the glass doors closed behind him like the end of an era where indifference and prejudice were nurtured by silence. No one expected that within just 7 minutes, from the moment he was asked to leave the bank until the dismissal of 3 senior managers, the entire system of a financial institution would be forced to confront its own conscience. 7 minutes, not driven by anger but by a terrifying calmness, was enough to expose everything the customer satisfaction reports had overlooked. But the matter did not stop there. That very day, the branch's surveillance footage was extracted and thoroughly analyzed by the legal department. The videos not only captured the moment of injustice against Julian, but also revealed a series of clear discriminatory behaviors. Customers of color asked for more documentation, elderly clients ignored, immigrants silently delayed in their transactions. No one could deny it. Everything was recorded like an indictment without a jury. That evening, an emergency board meeting was convened on the 41st floor of headquarters. Isaac Monroe presented the entire case with an unflinching attitude. The large screen replayed Melissa pointing at Julian, Jason sneering, Greg silently nodding in agreement. No one spoke. The chairman of the board, who had worked with Julian since his days as regional director, signed unprecedented decisions in the bank's history: the dissolution of the entire Oak Ridge branch management team, the establishment of an independent internal audit task force, and the reissuance of customer service policies under a new standard named the Carter Standard. A week later, Julian appeared before the media for the first time since the incident. He did not speak of himself, power, or fame. He simply recounted the story of a customer wanting to withdraw money, but instead receiving suspicion merely for not dressing as expected. Discrimination does not always come in blunt forms, he said. It comes in wary looks, in extra requests for documents, in sighs when someone unlike you approaches the counter. And if you are part of that, even without shouting, you are helping to build an unjust system. In the days that followed, thousands of messages poured into headquarters from customers, former employees, and those who had faced similar situations. Their words were brief, only 3 words: "I see you." And they were not just speaking to Julian, they were speaking to themselves, acknowledging that they had clearly seen the true face of a system they once thought mature. From that story, Larchmont Bank was never the same. They did not change their logo or slogans, but changed how they viewed people. They began retraining all staff, not just in professional skills, but in empathy. Julian no longer directly managed every branch. He did something deeper. He rewrote how an organization looks at customers, not through their wallets, but through their dignity. And among all those changes, one thing was never forgotten. Just 7 minutes, when one person dares to stand firm in the storm without retreat, can be enough to overturn a prejudice ingrained deep in the blood of an industry. It was not an act of rage. It was an act of justice. And justice, when standing tall, does not need to shout to be heard. In the service industry, the difference doesn't lie in technology or paychecks, but in how a person is seen and treated. Julian Carter didn't need power to prove his position. He only needed truth and perseverance. And that's what made the entire system change. If you believe that human dignity must always come before prejudice, please like this video, subscribe to never miss stories that make us rethink how we live and work, and leave a comment with the phrase "treat right" if you believe respect should never come with conditions.